morning, everyone. Thank you for sharing part of your Saturday with us. I know it's cold out there, so appreciate it. To begin, I would like to start with the land acknowledgement. We would like to recognize and acknowledge the lands originally used and occupied by the First Peoples of the William Treaties First Nations and other Indigenous peoples of this area, specifically the Chippewas of Georgina Islands First Nations and who are the water protectors and environmental stewards of these lands, and we need to join them in these responsibilities. Okay, so my name is Megan. I'm a volunteer at the David Suzuki Foundation. I am one of their butterfly rangers. Clearly I signed up because the title is amazing. We also have Brenda and Charmaine here. They're two of our East Gwillimbury gardeners. They're the ones that really have all the knowledge. So we're going to talk to you about winter sowing today. So we'll go over the why and the how with you. And at the end we'll have some time for questions. So a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Charmaine is deaf and she does rely on lip reading. So if you do find that we're repeating questions, that would be why. So please be patient with us. And if you could just wait till the end for any questions or discussions, so we can just get through the presentation, that would be great.
Although, Megan, just to add to that, if there's something that like we're right in the middle of something and you're thinking, then just shout it out. That should be fine.
Something needs to be clarified or something, by all means.
Because we're not professionals here. So
Definitely.
If we're not making sense, let us know.
So to begin, I just want to tell you a little bit about the David Suzuki Foundation and the Butterfly Way project, if you are not familiar with it. So one of the many focuses the David Suzuki Foundation has is helping our pollinators who are under constant threat from development, industrial agriculture, and climate change. So we need to work to protect them by ensuring that we have food and habitat for them to survive. So the idea of the Butterfly Way was based off of Douglas Tallamy's book, Homegrown National Park, or his idea of the Homegrown National Park, which was developed out of a concern of the disconnect between people and nature. So the idea was to focus on treating cities the way we do national parks, greening them up. Less cement, more plants. So for the past 6 years, the project has grown tremendously, and there are now 91 butterfly ways across Canada. A butterfly way is 12 pollinator gardens within a small area. And as of 2022, East Gwillimbury is a butterfly way. So we're very proud of that, and it's something that we want to strengthen and grow more on. You can't have too many flowers or pollinators around. So the more strength we can put into East Gwillimbury's ecosystem, it's just going to benefit us all. And yeah, that's basically everything to tell you about the Butterfly Way, and at the end I'm happy to answer any other questions on it. So this here is a little map about that shows. So if you go on the David Suzuki Foundation website, there's a national map, and then you can kind of zoom in on different areas and you can see kind of where these pollinator gardens are. So East Gwillimbury here has the giant butterfly. That means we are a butterfly way. And then all these little flowers throughout are the different gardens that have been designated. Here we have a couple of our pollinator friends. So yellow swallowtail, this is a monarch caterpillar, bumblebee in the top right, and then the Cardinal blue butterfly, which is no longer found in southern Ontario. So there is a lot of conservation efforts to try and help them, but basically they need wild lupins and only wild lupins to survive, and we don't have them in our area anymore. So it's a big problem. So plant wild lupins. So pollinator patch design tips here. So just things to focus on. Planting in clusters, so masses of 3 or 5. pollinators, they like to forage. You know, they're not gonna sit there on one flower and, you know, clean it out. They move around. So if you can have clusters of things, that helps them a lot. Diversity of species, we want things in bloom from, you know, spring till fall. Basically, there's no frost, we need things in flower. Leave some bare ground for nesting bees. Some do burrow into the ground, so if you're heavily mulched, that could be a bit of an obstacle for them. And leave dead hollow stems for cavity nesting bees, and include features such as rocks, logs, and please don't use pesticides. These are just some photos of the things that I've mentioned. So this winter shot here just has some milkweed stems. Got no mow-may, just some leave the weeds example, and then a red admiral butterfly because it's pretty. And I'm going to turn things over to Brenda to talk about the East Gwillimbury Gardeners.
Thank you, Megan. So my name's Brenda Neer. I'm the president of East Gwillimbury Gardeners. So we're a local gardening club, group, society, whatever you want to call us. We have a speaker series that runs from February to November. And so the information will be here. If you want, at the end, there's a brochure about us, and then inside is our little bookmark that has our whole speaker series on there. And anybody is welcome to join the group. There is a membership fee of like $20. It's a really great deal. But if you don't want to become a member, all our meetings are free with the speaker series, so you're welcome to come and join those. We are online from, February to April, we're online, and then we're in person from May to October, and then we're online again in November. But we do live stream our meetings as well, so you can always join in lots of ways, and we have lots of things to learn from, and we have groups that go out. We look after the literacy garden out here. Charmaine's in charge of that, and so we have a lot of fun, and you learn a lot. And one of our things that we do is work with groups like the Butterfly Way and Megan, and helping support those things and creating partnerships with other groups. So that's what that. And so they're just going to talk a little bit about why we want to do native plants specifically. All flowers are great, but native plants, because they've evolved here, and this is kind of just a schematic telling you, every plant obviously is native to somewhere, but the more local you can get a plant, the better it is, because the local insects in that area have co-evolved with that plant, and so it's going to provide the nutrition that insect needs at the specific time of the year, because they've kind of grown up together over a millennium of time. So you can narrow it down obviously to broad North America, down to Canada, down to Ontario, and then within Ontario you have your townships and regions, and there's things called ecoregions, and again, just kind of coming back to the co-evolution, you've got, this is a classic example, but butterflies in particular really have a lot of host plants, so their larvae can only eat the leaves and the plants of certain species. So if you don't have milkweed in your garden, you're not going to have, you might get a monarch come through to an adult to have some nectar at your flowers, but you're not gonna get them reproducing because you don't have the host plant. And actually, our native bees have host plants as well. They're starting to discover that certain pollen from certain species of native plants, that's the only pollen that the larvae can survive on. So if you don't have those, you're not going to support the native bees. And then David Talamy talks a lot about this, that if you have caterpillars in your garden, then you're also going to have birds, because birds really need the larvae to feed their young. And then just a little bit about bees and how much, I'm not going to go through it all, but it's just kind of interesting how much pollen it takes to feed specifically bumblebees to create a whole colony. So, you know, it's taking almost 200,000 milligrams of pollen to raise a colony of bees. So again, that needs to be good, nutritious pollen to feed them. So, and they're gorgeous, so why wouldn't you want them in your garden?
Okay, so next we're gonna get into winter sowing, and Charmaine,
Okay,
hand it over to you.
all right. Well, I'm going to address this. Pardon me if I turn my back, but I'm going to be getting things organized on the table. I'm going to try and do it in a logical fashion. As a newly minted master gardener, I'm going to try and outline everything. These are the tools that I find are helpful in preparing for winter gardening. Now, the basis is what we want to try and do is replicate what Mother Nature is doing. So, but we also want to prevent birds and squirrels and chipmunks from stealing our seeds, which they do with regularity. Okay, some of the things you will need that's on the handout: scissors,
Yes, we didn't go over that, but there's
containers, different types of containers. Now, okay, all right. Now, the key to winter sowing are two things. One, you need a translucent pot. So that could be this, you'll notice is a canola oil, right? You will read on some of the websites that are from the States that they use a lot of milk jugs. They do use milk jugs, but we don't have milk jugs, so we have to kind of go after. This is a used vinegar bottle. As long as it's translucent and lets the light in, it's fine, all right? Some people use these, you get these with strawberries, blueberries, right? These are ideal as well. They've already got all the holes in them, top and bottom. But what I find with the bottom is that the soil, because the holes are so big, the soil tends to seep out. So you put a coffee filter on the bottom, and that takes care of the problem, all right? That's that one. I have, in the past, done so much that I had to go out and buy some. So these were from Dollarama. They are metal, right, with the cover already on it. So again, it gives you just the right depth of soil, and then the covered part. Okay, and the other ones that you can use are these, which the lettuce comes in. All right, you get lettuce, right? You will have, I didn't bring my drill, but as you can tell, I didn't use a drill on here. I got fed up trying to get the drill without collapsing the container. So I said, okay, I had a trusty X-Acto knife, and I did it. So you're looking at putting enough drainage holes in the bottom of this so that your water does not accumulate. The lid also needs holes to let the moisture in, right? So that's the first, that's that. This container, now the instructions say to keep a part of your container with, shall we say, a hinge. I wasn't fond of that. So what I did was I cut like that. So I cut just this with the scissor so that I can, my holes, this I did use a drill for, right? Drill on the top end, drill on the bottom, right? What I find, if you're using a drill to hold your material in place, a solid piece of styrofoam, the packing styrofoam, you put in, and then it's easy to get the pressure with your drill down. What I find with this is it's easier to fit. Once I've got that done, and it's easy to fit inside this and there, okay? So that's how I go about that one. Now, when the main way to do this is, I'm sorry, I don't work in centimeters, I work in inches, okay? I get a funny feeling that the most of you work in inches as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In the instructions, there are translations for centimeters, but I use my fingers as a measure. So if it's got my fingers there, it's deep enough to sow seeds, okay? So then, toss my marker, and I just go around and cut. And again, some people say that you need the hinge. Well, to make the hinge, you would cut around and then leave that part attached. So you would cut. Again, before you cut, if you're using one of these, drill your holes first. It's easier to get the pressure down, to get the holes drilled, and the same thing this way. Once you've got it cut, it collapses. So it's easier to do that way. Now, if you're using, this is a date container. Again, my measurement is just about right. So with this one, I would use 3 fingers rather than the 4. Again, I would put holes in it, so you can use anything that's clear, anything out of your recycle bin, anything to keep it out of the landfill, is the way I look at things. I personally find, I'm going to come back to that. So they have to be washed out, whatever you have. So this one still smells of vinegar. Well, if I don't wash it out properly, my plants are going to die because of the vinegar that's inside. So you need to wash it out really well. Okay? You also need to have this handy, which is, I know Brenda brought one, somebody brought another one, right? To spray, that's handy as well. I'm going to get to the actual soil in the container in a minute. The other tools that I find handy to have are, I use these, and I'll explain how I use these in a minute. They're not good for eating, that's what they were designed for. Tweezers. Tweezers to handle seeds, if you want. We'll show you some seeds in a minute, and if you want to pull the seeds apart, this too, if they've got a lot of fluff, then these two help. Scissors. I always keep a number of, these are my wet paper towel scissors. They're the only scissor that goes through the paper towel when it's wet. Handy to have. The pens, the markers. Again, on the handout, we have the different markers noted. Brenda brought hers, which is a bit different than mine. This is your Sharpie, but depending on the material you're writing on, these will fade, okay? These are, it's written permanent, but it's not. This was last year, so it didn't fade on me. But to make sure that I know what's in the bottle, not only do I write on the bottle itself, I use plant markers inside in case this fades, right? So I've always got a record. Speaking of records, where did I put it? Right here. Always note what you've planted and where you've put it in the garden, because otherwise, and the date, you want to know the date that you put it in. So that is just a record of where it is, because I don't know about you, but I'm getting to a certain age where I forget an awful lot of stuff if I don't write it down. So I need to write it down. Seed saving is another one. If you're seed saving, write down what you've got right away. Do not rely on, oh, I'll remember that, because 6 months from now, no, you won't. So write it down. So the other 2 markers, go back to markers. The other 3 markers that I have here are 3 brands of what they call oil-based markers. The reason you can tell it's an oil-based marker, it's got a little, so it makes a noise. So I always make sure that when I go to the store, even though I'm deaf, I can still pick up the noise that the marker makes. Brenda's is slightly different. It's
just a permanent marker, but it's a sted letter permanent, and it so far it's been working. So, and I had read somebody else used it, so I tried it, and it's certainly working better than the Sharpies. The Sharpies are useless.
And then I have this outdoor marker that I got from Lee Valley actually, so it's supposed to be UV resistant. So far it's worked. We'll see. It worked over the summer. We'll see if it works over the winter. I can report so far so good.
And sometimes I will write in pencil.
These other markers are available at, I found some at Staples, but the other place I found them is at Michael's. So Michael's has them, but they keep moving them around, so you have to really look for them, right? So we've talked about plant tags, we've talked about containers, we've talked about cleaning the containers, duct tape. Not all duct tape is made equal, all right? So some stick better than others. Again, depending on the type of material you're using, some will stick, some won't. But the duct tape should go that way, and then make sure that it catches the bottom. It is a way to deter, as I said, the rodents from eating your seeds, and some rodents will go after your germinating seeds rather than, and I can't blame it all, birds as well. Birds, the goldfinches love germinating beets, and they love them, and they write me, I plant beets, not for us, for the birds, because that's what, okay. Now, the other thing, so when you're putting your soil in, what I'd like to do is, I like to use in the bottom pieces of toilet roll or paper towel roll. In the bottom, I cut them, and then I place them inside. Yeah. Now, some people will use peat pots. I find that peat pots have a tendency to grow mold. That's my personal thing that I've seen. I use it only for the convenience of lifting the seed out of the pot, because I do cover them with soil, because you need a good, but you know approximately where these are going to be inside your pot. And so then you try and get the seeds in the inside the toilet roll. So then this is where my trusty fork comes in. It's got just the right bent in it to get down underneath and then easily lift it out. So that way I am disturbing, or Brenda has, you go ahead.
That's kind of what I use, because I don't have a fork like that, which is very cool. So if you find one, that's a good find. But like a little spatula or, something like that could work as well.
Okay, so I think, did I miss something now? I think.
Do you want me to do soil?
I'd like you, okay, I'm going to add one little thing about soil before Brenda takes over the soil. aspect. I have read that you should not be using moisture control preparations for sowing, winter sowing. They, everything that I've read so far points to using peat, like Brenda will have, I have. This is what I use, all right? But this is expensive, yes. But I find that for my purposes, this works. But I am never one to take for granted what I'm being told. I always question. So my question, I thought, well, the only way I'm going to get through this, I have a question. Why not use moisture control? It sounds logical to me, but all the literature, as I said, are against it. So I'm doing my own trials this year. I've tried in this and the same seed, but with moisture control, to see if what they say is true. Because as I say, I'm always a little bit, I always question things that are said, well, that's it. The soil. Okay, that was it, I think. Yeah, okay.
Why?
I'll do one more little bit, okay. The seeds need to go through a cold, moist stratification, okay, which means you're reproducing inside what's happening outside. Because as Brenda explained, these seeds have gone through millennia of growing this way, and the different species need different things. The soil needs to be moist. It needs to be wet, not sopping wet, but wet, so that when you touch it, when you put a handful on it, it stays, right? If it's too wet, it'll squish out your fingers. If it's too dry, it'll fall apart. You need it just that right consistency, okay? Is that it? Okay, over to Brenda.
Okay. And just to follow up a little bit on that stratification type of thing, perennial seeds in particular, you won't find that with your annual seeds. You don't have to do that with your vegetables and your little, calendula or, your annual seeds like pansies and stuff. But perennial seeds and your native plant seeds, they need this cold, moist stratification because the seeds themselves have an enzyme on them, and the actual moisture and the snow and the cold will help break that down so that they can then germinate in the spring. So those containers that Charmaine was showing you are ones that would go outside, and basically you're having them covered so that they'll germinate without being eaten by all the critters that she was talking about. I'm going to go through some soil and talk about that, and then I'll talk about if you don't want to put your seeds outside in containers like that, how to do it inside and replicate that in your fridge. So soil. I'm a maverick. I don't believe all the stuff that people tell you about soil. So I'm experimenting with different things. I don't really think you need a soilless mix. When native seeds fall on the ground, they germinate in the ground. That's not a soilless mix, it has soil. So, whether I get a little less germination, I'm not sure, but so there's different things. You don't want a heavy soil. I don't like peat. I personally am trying to get away from using a lot of plastic. I'm trying to get away from using things with a high carbon footprint, blah, blah, blah. It's extremely difficult, but so I don't like peat because of the peat bogs, and they it's really destroying that habitat. So I don't want to use peat. So what does that leave you with? Well, then people turn to coir, which is a byproduct of coconut. I have a sample here. I'll pass it around in a minute. So it's kind of like a peat. The problem with that is it does come with a fairly high carbon footprint because they've got to grind up the coconut shells, they've got to ship it from, I mean, we don't grow coconuts here, obviously, so there's shipping involved. It comes in compressed cubes, you can get it at Lee Valley, so I have bought it, obviously. So it works, but, you know, again, it's coming, obviously it's been manufactured, that kind of thing. So I'm like, I'm not that keen on that. But if you're just doing a few small things and you want to start, I think it's a pretty good product. So I'll pass it around, and this, you can kind of, if you don't mind getting your hands a little dirty, it's kind of nice to get your hands dirty. You can kind of reach in and feel that moisture that Charmaine was talking about, and kind of the correct moisture that it should be. It might be a titch dry, but it's Coir, so it's C-O-I-R. That probably doesn't have it written in here. This one might have a little mix of stuff in it too.
If you were to put in your search coconut soil alternative, it'll pop up.
Yeah, there it is written on there. So what's my alternative then? Well, we're lucky, we have a big property, so we have compost and we have access to, we get in and we just have a place that has soil, you know, topsoil near us, so I just get a big trailer load of that. I keep it in compost bins and then I mix it a bit with my compost, and as you can see here, I will zoom out. It's very big and chunky. It's got a lot of chunky bits in it. So it's a heavy soil. So I probably don't want to put my seeds in that because they're going to kind of get lost and kind of, you know, it's a little tricky.
And I add something that what I did find with the Miracle Grow, you've got your sifter there, with the Miracle Grow moisture control, is that it's got an awful lot of debris in it as well. It's not quite as uniform as what I've showed you. So this kind of an operation would be handy to have.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I got this at an online auction for like 50 cents. I was pretty excited about that. It's like a whole box of sifters. I was like, yes. And nobody bid on it. I was like, oh, I want that. So just putting that in there, making quite a mess of the library here, but and then just giving a little sift. And then you can see I've got all that chunky bit is left in there. And then I've got a pretty nice mix of soil here.
So that's mainly compost?
That's compost and just like a topsoil mix that I got from a local, so it's nothing, it's not in a plastic bag, it's not Miracle Grow, it's not, you know, it's just a basic, what do they call it? Triple mix is the word I was looking for. So just sift it out, and then, did I do some? Yes, I did some here. So I put it in here, and you can see it is a heavier consistency. If you're concerned about that and you have some coir, mix the two together until you get a consistency that you think you're happy with. And then experiment, you know, maybe do, if you have a lot of seed, do one, you know, and this can be in bag, I've got them in bags here, but this is what could be going in your outdoor containers or in your baggies, and I'll show that. So you can send that around. That's the moistened soil that I sifted. So let's say you don't want to do the outdoor thing. Actually, sorry, I will backtrack a second. When I do outdoor sowing for my perennial seeds, I don't bother with those contraptions. I have an area, there it is, thank you. I have a raised area, so I don't find that the chipmunks and the bunnies and all that get into it. And I just use trays like this. It's a little shallower than what Charmaine was talking about, but it's pretty close. And I will actually put like compost on the bottom, like a little layer of compost on the bottom, and then I'll do my soil mix on top, seed them into that, and then some seeds, if they're very, very, very fine seeds, you don't want to cover them, you just want to press them in, because most seeds that are really tiny need light to germinate. If they're a bit bigger, then you probably want to get them into the ground and sprinkle a little bit on top and pat them in.
When they're a little bit bigger, this was my mother's flower sifter that I put to a different use. I use it in the garden. Now, if you don't have one that can be repurposed, the dollar stores have them in a smaller version. And they can be used, that can be used to spread the soil on not the very fine seed, but the
other seed.
next layer, the next type of seed.
Yeah, yeah, or you could use something like that again. Anyway, I find these work really well. And usually, if you're a plant person, you probably have trays, because everything you buy comes in these plastic trays. And then I can just label them on there, and I always put a tag in as well, and I write it down. So I've got it, listed, and I just kind of, do you mind going back to that other side for a minute? And one of the other key things too is to where you place your outdoor sowing is on a north side somewhere, so it's not getting sun, so it's not thawing and then freezing and thawing and freezing. That will pretty much, once the snow gets on it, they'll stay covered with the snow pretty much all winter. Then in the spring, I will move those into where they'll get some more sunlight and they can start to germinate. I also have like a little, not a greenhouse, but like some cold frames, and I'll put them in the cold frames just to try and get them germinating a little bit quicker, but you don't have to do that. Some native seeds are tricky and they don't want to germinate right away. So I had, what was it? I can't think what it was now. Yes,
Blue flag.
No, that
Blue
one's
flag.
really hard. A giant blue lobelia, that's what it was. And beautiful plant. And I sowed the seeds and nothing came up. And then so I've got these trays, I just kind of put it off to the side. I was like, I didn't have time. And then this fall I went to clean stuff up and there they were, they had germinated. And so I potted them all up and they were like nice sized plants. They had pretty good roots. So, so don't give up on them. If you have the space, just kind of,
So Brenda, when you
give
do
them
it like this way, you don't have a clear plastic.
I
that you're
don't
putting on
bother
top.
with the clear plastic. Again, you could. The first year I did it, I had window frames and I put them on top, but then they don't get the snow, and the snow really helps. That's why Charmaine puts holes in her top covered containers. So, it's kind of play around, but if you have a lot of squirrels I do, but because I've got them on tables, they don't seem to bother them, they don't click into it.
I did that last winter and I put chicken wire over the top of them
Yeah,
because the
and that
squirrels
would
are
work too.
intense
Yeah,
in
we
my
have
neighborhood.
Okay, and I have added, I do what Brenda does too, but in my garden, and to keep the vermin out, I put used baby gates on it. The baby gate keeps the squirrels out, all right? And I'm repurposed something, so instead of hitting the landfill.
Sounds good. Okay. So if you don't want to do them outside, then I do use little plastic bags. And basically you're just going to, I'll do this corner one and
While Brenda is doing that, I use the same method as Brenda for certain things, but I found what they call snack bags instead, cheaper and more, and I'm losing
not
less.
as-
I don't reuse, I put these in the bin, but these are, that's what I use rather than using the full sandwich bag.
So this is giant ironweed seeds. Anyway, I love seeds. I mean, everyone's so different, but these guys are fluffy little things. So the seed is on the tip of the fluff. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to remove the fluff to get the germination. That doesn't really matter. So all I literally do is I'll just put them in my bag.
That's really easy.
It's very easy. And then I just give it a little mush around. Try and get them, usually I kind of get them in there a little bit better. And just so that you want to make sure that they're in contact with that moist soil. And previous to that, like I've taken the dry soil, I put it in there, I spray it, feel it until it's kind of the right moisture, get them in there, and then that goes in my fridge. Label it. So I need to label that. I'm gonna say giant ironweed.
Can I just ask, do you add water to any of this? Or it just is, it stays that way? 'cause it's in
Yes,
the Ziploc, right?
it stays like that. Yeah, just the initial spray, and then I don't, I'll get to that in a minute, a little bit.
Seems
What's
too easy,
today?
right?
Yeah.
February 2nd, right? So I want the date on that because, and on our little resource page, you'll see that most seeds need about 30 to 60 days of the cold moist treatment. Some need a little longer, some need a little shorter. That's why I sowed all those in my trays. I did that in November, but you could do it now, like, cause we've still got lots of time for them to have it. But that's just easier for me. It's kind of the end of the season. It's what I do. But you know, you can do it now. You can get your seed. That's kind of why we're doing this now, so you have at least a 30 to 60 day period to try this and get them going. But if, as I say, if you don't want it because it's cold, you don't want to be outside, just do this in your fridge. I just put them in my crisper thing, I label them, and I put it on my calendar. Okay, 30 to 60 days. This, I think ironweed is 30 days, but you know, maybe it's 60. I will bring them out after that time period, and then I just kind of sit them on my windowsill.
Still in the plastic bag.
Still in the plastic bag, keep them in the plastic bag, and then you just keep checking them. And all of a sudden you'll start to see little sprouts, and some of them take longer, some of them are shorter. And then once they start getting, you know, big enough, you start seeing the roots, and then that's when you've got to get them out of the bag and get them into pots of some description, whatever works for you. You can do tray kind of like this, or these little things. And the main thing for that is that you have a water, and you want to water from underneath. And what I do is I fill these, again, I will put some compost in this, because now they've got roots. They need some nutrients. You don't want to just be soilless mix now. You want to be, you know, even though I don't do that, but if you were doing that, now is the time that you need some nutrients. So I get some compost in the bottom, some soil on top, and then I water it from underneath so that it's all moist before I try and put in my seeds. And then I use like a little thing like this, and you want to put I didn't bring the soil, but if you put a little hole in, and then you get your seed out, and you can get it into your soil. You have to be very careful not to break the root. The roots are, you know,
Absolutely.
really important. So
Absolutely, that's where the tweezers also come in handy. If you're using that method, the tweezers will help you gather the not the germ that's out, but the seed head itself, and you can handle that, because like Brenda said, it's important not to damage that root. And somewhere there I have an example of cardinal flower seeds in a little plastic bag. They are so tiny. They're like, it's like pepper, worse than pepper,
Yes.
even, right? They would be spread over the top. They were here. I don't know where they went. Not a big deal. You would spread them on the top and of your. What I do is I do two things. Is I spray the top, like Brenda said, with the water, and then I put my hand down and just make sure that the seed has contact with the ground.
Yeah.
That's what you're aiming for.
And to that point, with the small seeds, like this is great, and some of them will be covered. Some things like it darker, so like some of these are exposed, so maybe when I take them out of the fridge, I might put them in the dark for a little bit so that they have some dark to germinate, and then I'll bring them up to the light. You kind of have to play around. There's lots of websites listed here about, you know, to look up how long they need and whether they need dark or light to germinate. But the really, oh yeah, go ahead.
When you bring that out of the fridge and you're putting it in the light or something, do you unseal it just a bit to let air in?
You can. I don't typically, unless it seems to be getting really hot and really moist, then you have to kind of play around with it, because it can, if you'll see, you'll start getting condensation in there and it's almost too moist, then things can rot before they germinate too much, so you have to play around with that a little bit. One thing I found last year though with doing this with the really fine seed, I didn't get the germination because the fine seed does just get completely covered and then it's too dark for it, it's not getting the light. So this year I'm going to try, these are just tofu, tofu containers. Again, some holes in them, and then you can use a second one so it doesn't leak everywhere. Fill it with your soil, spread your little tiny seeds on top, press them in like you were saying to get so your soil will be moist. Press the seeds in, and then just do that.
Yep.
And in your fridge, and I figure I can stack them. They're not going to take up too much room, but they'll have the light, as opposed to this method. They're getting buried. They're not. It's not working for me. So the outdoor ones, they're fine. They work fine. But if you want to get a jump on it inside the house and doing it inside the house, then I think something like that will work. And then the other thing I was going to show you was how to make a paper pot, but go ahead.
Outside ones also go for 30 to 60 days?
Yes, or longer, because as I say, I do mine in November, so they'll be sitting out there all winter, which is kind of replicating more what nature does. But as long as you get them out, you know, if you sow them now and get them outside, as long as they have 30 to 60 days, you don't want it any shorter than that, they're not gonna get going. But they might, you know.
But do get them outside quickly, because I was interrupted one time. I had a whole tray of, actually it was blue flax. I had a whole tray of blue flax planted, and I was ready to, and something interrupted me. I can't tell you what, but I left them in the furnace room. Unbeknownst to me, they all germinated, but it was like that outside, so I couldn't get them out, so I lost a whole tray of blue flax. So make sure that when you start, you can finish.
That's true. Now one thing I do again, I'm trying to get away from too much plastic, so I also make paper pots, and it's really, really easy. So I'm going to show you how to do that because it's kind of fun. And you know, we get lots of these local papers, and some of you get the Toronto Star or your Flyers, whatever. I find the Star actually works quite well, but so I just take a page and fold it like that. I haven't done this in a while, so I'm not sure I do it right. I like using a tin can, so you can get different size pots. I'll do this one. You want to have the folded end with the closed end. Is that right? Yes. And then just kind of pick, depending, you know, you want enough room so that you can fold this in, but you don't want it too long. And you just roll it. So you've got your closed end there. Now you've got your open end here. And you just Fold that in like that. Pull it out, and you can just push that down, and you've got a pot. And you know what? They actually hold up quite well. They don't fall apart too much. I find that the roots kind of start growing through, but that's okay for them. You can plant it in the ground fully like that if you want, or just kind of break it apart. I break it apart because I think it helps get the roots out. The only thing I find is that they dry out quicker. So if you're keeping them in the pots for a period of time, you do need to water them a little bit more, and you have to water from the top, which watering from the bottom is probably the better way to go, but you know, it's a nice way to reuse something and not be relying on plastic. And then if they start to fall apart, I just make another one. And so then you can make wider pots, you can make tall, narrow pots. Yeah, and it's pretty good for those plants that don't like a lot of root disturbance, because then you can just kind of pull it off and get them in the ground, or even just plant the whole thing in the ground, and then you're not, you know, you're not breaking the roots trying to pop them out of plastic pots and that kind of thing. So.
Okay, I'm gonna finish off by, well, not finish off, but I'm gonna mention at this point.
I think,
Sorry, can I just,
Yeah, absolutely.
I just wanna show you guys,
oh yeah,
is,
because she does something different.
so, I'm sure you've
Okay.
noticed there's a lot of different ways you could approach the same thing. So you just have to trial and error what works for you, what resources you have. Like Brenda, myself, I go to the refill stores. I try and minimize all my waste, so I didn't have things to recycle like that. So I actually had to go out and buy something. This I got from Lee Valley. I sound like a plug, I do not work for them. This is made out of recycled water bottles. So at least it's repurposed plastic. But basically what I'll do is I'll just take like a 1 gallon pot, I half bury it in the ground in my garden to keep it from tipping over, that's the only reason. And then I just put that over top and walk away till spring. So
And what kind of soil do you use?
I just use either potting soil or stuff from the garden. The garden stuff, you're going to get other things germinating in there, so if you don't know how to recognize the seed that's in there, that's something to consider. But
usually it's fairly obvious though.
Yeah,
Like, you know,
yeah.
if your seed is germinating, you'll start to see that they all look the same, and then you've got ones that don't look like it, so you pull those out, right?
Yeah, I'm partly lazy, partly cheap. I don't want to buy special soil for starting my seeds, so I just use what I have. I also am trying to avoid peat at all costs. It's hard. There's no perfect alternative. It's, you know, just, I'm just trying to accept it is what it is. And maybe there's things I can't grow from seed, so. But I'm not here to tell anyone how to live their life. Everyone needs to make their own decisions. But that's just my approach. And also with talking about seedlings being delayed, one thing to mention is milkweed always is late to start. The amount of times I've planted milkweed seeds and think they didn't take, and then a couple months later they're growing up through a plant I put there because I gave up on it. So yeah, definitely give them a little extra window. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's some, like that's what I have in here is the iris. So the seeds that we have that are in the seed library are not tricky ones. They're fairly straightforward ones. But once you get, you know, maybe you'll get into it. But there are some seeds like the blue flag iris that needs like 30 days of warm and then 30 days of cold and then 30 days of I'm like, how does this plant survive? It's so finicky. It's like the, you know, royalty of the plant world. So, you know, and trees are like that too. If you want to get into trees, they need a lot of different stratifications. There's also some seeds that need something called a scarification. So they have a hard coating on them. So you get some sandpaper and rub them. You can make these jars that you know you can put bolts and stuff like that in them and shake it and try and break the seed coat that way. Because normally what would happen is they'd be eaten by birds and then pooped out somewhere, and that actually breaks down that seed coat. I'm not gonna eat them and do that, so, you know, we have to kind of replicate that process, so.
There are a number of books out on the market. We were going to get a list of resources, but this one I discovered about a year ago, and it's by a homegrown author, Lorraine Johnson, all right, who does extensive education about the rusty patch, any one of our native butterflies or bees or pollinators. This book is ideal, is great, because at the back she has a picture and then the growing conditions that you need to meet to get these to germinate. So it's an excellent, excellent resource. It's full of all of these are native plants to Ontario, okay, to Ontario. Not necessarily, we talked briefly about ecoregions, but these are native to Ontario, okay? So it's to encourage the rusty patch bee, which has only been cited in the US at the moment, but it used to be in it used to be prolific in this area, but because of our environment, it's listed, you will be getting a part of
I
that.
think it was in the 80s, I might be wrong on the range there, but the rusty patch bumblebee was the most common bumblebee that we saw here. And now,
I know we don't see
That's
it.
right.
it might have been 2012 the last time it
That's right.
was cited, it might have even been later than that.
Yeah.
Where can we get that book?
Brenda,
Where
you
did
wanna
get-
add?
Where did you get it? Where did you buy it?
I pre-ordered it online from Amazon.
I got it from Kohl's in the Upper Canada Mall.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. it's
When
a-
I heard through the Master Gardener program that this was coming out, so I made sure that I had my name down for when it first came out. But I think it must be available now in most bookstores.
Yeah.
Right.
And
The other one,
there is a free download version, but it's not as extensive. But if you know you want to start somewhere without putting out some money, and I think that's on your resource list as
this
well.
is another one. Doug Tallamy is a US author, but he's got all of his books, and every time I hear him talk, I've heard him about 6 times now, and every time I've heard him talk, I come away with something else. So if you ever get a chance to listen to Doug Tallamy about one of these free webinars, do. He is excellent, and so is she. I saw her 2 weeks ago on a webinar. Excellent, excellent, free nowadays, but he has a number of books, and so does Lorraine Johnson, have a number of books out. Any of the advice that he gives for planting natives could be relied on.
And there's another author, I didn't bring the books, but Heather Holm, which is on there as well. And she's amazing if you're interested in native bees. She's got so much information and really good books. Her books can be found through Pollination Guelph, but if you look up her books, you should be able to track it down.
I found the seed
You
packet.
found this.
These are cardinal flower seeds. Okay, so they would be sown, they are so tiny,
It's like sand.
you know,
Yeah.
they would blow away.
Yeah,
But
don't
so you
sneeze
would-
when you're.
You would put them, spread them, and then just put your hand on them. So if you want to have a look at other types of seeds, I brought these along too, just to have a look.
And then, of course, part of the reason why we're here today is because the 3 of us and one other gardener in the garden group has donated a bunch of native plant seeds from our native plant gardens. And so they're here for you to take out through the libraries